Okay, so I'm going to CD into just where, because I'm going to create a Rails project. So just like I do with React, I want to CD into, a directory where I want this project to live. So I've already made a week 3 directory, so I'm going to CD into that. I guess I got to CD into DPL demo. So this is where I'm going to want this app to live. And here's the command I'm going to run. So to create a new Rails app, I'm going to call this Rails. I'm going to do Rails new. And this is like a lot like the yarn create React app. And then I give it the name of the project. So what we're going to build out a app or a backend. And this is going to be a full stack app where it's going to be a place where we can save, kind of like resources, like links, links to like tutorials and links to the articles. So it's really just a place to store links. So I'm just going to call this, links API demo, whatever, spring 22. Now I want to use the PostgreSQL database that we just installed. So I need to give it a flag to say, hey, use that database. And then I'm also going to give it another flag, this API flag. Now Rails by default will have a lot of stuff to do with what's called views. So like it can give you all of this like HTML stuff and ways to work with like your HTML and CSS and JavaScript, as well as like the backend stuff. We don't want Rails to do any of our front end stuff because we're going to be using React for that. React is taking, it's kind of overtaking Rails for that part in this app. So we only want to use Rails as like the back end portion of our app. So this is what that API flag is doing. So I run that, and this goes ahead and it builds out that project. So now I can CD into that app. And once, just kind of like our React app, notice how we have a GitHub repo. I do a git status. There's like a whole bunch of stuff there that we can look at. So I'm just going to do a git add commit to commit all this stuff. So this is my init commit. And I can open this project up in code. Where did that go? And here it is. So yeah, we have a lot of stuff inside of here, a lot of folders, a lot of, just from running that command, we're getting a lot of stuff. We're getting like this built out project. So that's what Rails is like, a framework. Rails gives us these tools to, build out a website quickly. So what I do next is I can go ahead and do a Rails. I need to create a database for this project. So I can use this Rails command line tool. I can say Rails DB create. This goes ahead and this creates a database. So now this project has a database associated with it. I can also do a Rails S and give it a port 3001. So I'm telling, hey, run a Rails server on port 3001. Run that. And just like this is like that yarn start command, I can say Rails server, give it a port, and it's going to run my server. And notice how like I'm now, just like with the yarn start, it's kind of just stuck here. It's actually now listening for, requests. So now I have this server running. and I can go to a web browser. I can go to localhost 3000 M1, and there's my Rails app. So this is up and running. I ran 3 commands, and I have a server, a website server running. And now if I go back to my server, I can see like, oh, doesn't this kind of look familiar than what we were talking about last week, like a get slash. So my server is now listening for requests. So it just got a get request for the slash route. And it knows once it gets that route to return this page. Sweet. So that's what's going on there. I'm going to go ahead and stop my server with a Control-C. So what I want to do is I want to create, what's called a model. I want to create a way to interact with my database. And I want to create some, tables in my database. Now, I actually only want to create one table in my database. So I can use the Rails command line tool to help me do this. So I'm going to create a model called links. So this is a keyword you're going to hear a lot, model. So when we talk about models, you can think about a model being the thing that interacts with the database. It's not necessary. It's not the database. It's the thing that knows how to interact with our database. And you can also think about models as like real world objects. Like I could have a car model. I could have a person model. I could have what I'm going to create is I'm going to create a link model. Now, my model name is link. Now I want to give it some attributes. So a link is going to have a URL. I'm going to give it the type of data. That's going to be a string. A link is also going to have like a username, like who created this link. That's also going to be a string. I could have a title. So there could be a title about the link. That's also going to be a string. And I could maybe have like a description, like tell me about this like this link. So you could think of like one link, like this is going to get saved to my database. A link's going to have like a URL. That's going to give me a way to get, it's just kind of a way to like go see the website. It's going to have a username, like who created this link. It's going to have a title and a description. And I just hit enter, and boom, Rails creates some files for me. The 2 important ones it creates is in my database, it changes in this migrate folder, it creates what's called a migration. These are the instructions to create the links table to my database. And I can see my links table has a URL, a username, a title, and description, and there's the type of data. They're all strings. It also creates in my app, in this models folder, a link.rb. And this is my actual link model, and we'll kind of show, we'll throw some code in here to kind of show what this does. So sweet, that's my model. Now I can do this. I can do a Rails migrate. That goes in and that creates an actual table to my database. So it actually goes through, it looks at this migration file, and now in my database, I now have this links table in my database. So I can do a Rails C. This is different than a Rails server. I can do a Rails console. This is kind of like when I run like Node. I can go in and now I can start typing Ruby. So, but I can also type Ruby in the context of this project. So I can do something like this. I can do a model. So I can do my model name, which is going to be a capital L link. There's my model. So I can do stuff like this, link.create. I want to create a link to my database. So I could say username, that's James, title, yo, article here. I could give it a URL attribute, www.whatever.com, and a description. So I go in here, and then what I actually see here, this is some actual like SQL. So my model knows how to talk to my database. It's going to create this SQL for me, and it's actually going to create this in my database. And one way I know this is in my database, notice how I have like an ID. Well, that has been created to my database because now I have this ID. I also have like this created at and updated at. Sweet. So now I could do something like this, model dot all. Oh, sorry, I need to call it's link, it's not model. I'm going to call my link model because this model knows how to interact with the database. And I'm going to call this all method on it. And this gives me back an array of all my links. So I could go in and create another article. Just change some of these fields. So now I can just create all of these entries into my database, like maybe Bob creates an article or link. Now I do a link.all, and now I can pull all three of those links from my database. Now these are actually getting saved to a database. Like I could turn off my computer, restart this project, come in and run a Rails C and do link.all. Like those are going to persist in my database. Now this database is local to my computer. But this information now persists. This is now more like it's stored. It is it's going to be stored to your hard drive. So that is our model. Our model interacts with the database, and it's a way we can abstract real world objects into these individual things. What does this data kind of look like?
Objects.
Yeah, right? This just looks like an array of objects. So if I do a link.all, now my server is going to just send back that array of objects. And in React, we probably know how to handle this, right? We have an ID, we have these keys, and then they're just strings. Our ID is a number. These created at are actually date times, different type of data. So sweet. So that's the model part. There's one other key part that we need to do, and that is a controller. So I'm going to do a Rails G controller, and I'm going to name this API/links. So in Rails, the model name is always singular and the controller name is always plural. So if I have a link model, I'm going to have a links controller. If I have a car model, I would have a cars controller. I append it with, or prepend it with API/ as a convention, just because this is only an API. But let's just see what this does. Let's run this command. Really what this does is in my controllers folder, it creates an API folder, and then it creates this links controller. So if I go to my controllers folder, I now have this new API folder, And inside of here, I have this links controller. Sweet. So let's go ahead and what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to come in here, type a URL and get all of those links from my database. So let's do those steps. So there's one other file I need to look at, and that is going to be the routes.rb file. You can think about this file. I mean, you can really kind of think about this as like a restaurant type deal, where my website or like Chrome, this is like the customer. And the customer is going to come in here and they're going to order something. They're going to, hey, like, I want to get the links. You can kind of think of this routes file like as your menu. This is what they can select from. Your controller is kind of like the server at the restaurant, where it knows how to get that request from the customer and then go back to the kitchen. You could kind of think of the kitchen as like your database. Goes back to the kitchen, gets the stuff, and then can send it back to the client. So think about the routes as like, this is our menu for browser. You know, we also call this menu is called an API. Application Programming Interface. I really think, yeah, think of it as a menu. You know, if I went to McDonald's and I ordered like a, you know, a taco, they would be like, what? I don't know what that is. I can't give you a taco. That's not on our menu. If I go to McDonald's and order like a Happy Meal, they'll get me a Happy Meal. So this is where we define our menu. We define it with something called, you know, an HTTP protocols. So I'm going to set up, you know, like a dish, a route. I can call it a route. I'm going to say, hey, if someone does a GET request. So when we think of HTTP, we're going to think of these verbs. There is a GET, a POST, a CREATE, no, sorry, I gotta go with the PUT or a patch. There's a delete. It's a very simple, it's like super simple menu. We have these verbs. A GET is going to relate to like, actually, let me put these in order so we can see the acronym. POST is going to be create. This is going to be read. Going to be update. Delete. There's our CRUD actions, and these are the HTTP verbs that go along with those actions. So I'm defining this menu in my or this item in my menu, API links. If you, as my menu, I'm saying, hey, I'm going to handle this. If you give me a GET request to API links, I want you to go, I want to go to the links. Oh, sorry, I need to do this. There's one thing I'm forgetting. This is kind of, let's just kind of like, so kind of just doing this because we have an API. So this is going to prepend all routes with API. just a convention. And we'll see why this is nice. And, you know, as probably today, we'll kind of see what this will kind of help distinguish, like, oh, this is a Rails route, or like this is like a React router route. It kind of helps with that. So what I'm going to say is if you do a GET request to links, go to that links controller and go to the index method. This is just kind of Rails syntax. So in my links controller, and this is how we define a method in Ruby. So why is this called index? It is convention. Right, here's my menu. If you go to the links, it's going to take you to the index method, and this should, responsibility of this is to return all links. I'm going to start my server, Rails s-p 3001. What doesn't it like here? Oh, I have a error. So I'm getting a syntax error. Resources. Still have a syntax error. Sorry, it's like, oh wait, sorry, it's namespace. What am I doing? Namespace. What did I do? Okay. I'm having a lapse. This is like really basic Rails, and I'm having a lapse in memory. So I'm just going to look at that repo. Why can't I haven't like written Rails in like, why actually I did this weekend. So I just need to look this up really quick. What am I forgetting? One second. It's ultimate fill namespace. It's got, I don't know, it's gotta be that, right? All right. Fine. I have to look up the repo. Okay. Second. Routes. What? I swear I swear I tried that. This is why I'm getting confused. Oh, duh. Okay. Yeah, that's right there. Looking at the wrong spot. Sorry. It did have it right. I was just looking at the wrong spot. Okay, sweet. Yay, my server's running. So my server can't run if I have a syntax error. But now I have this namespace API get links to link index. So now let's go to API/links. All right. So that didn't do anything because in my links controller, I don't really have anything. Let's just do this. Let's render JSON link.all. Let's just comment this out. Let's not even have that defined. I'm just going to comment that out. Let's refresh. Localhost 3001 API/links. The action index could not be found. If I go back to my routes, switch that to index yo or whatever index e. Like it's just like that index could not be found. So this is, I'm saying, hey, go to this links controller and go to this method. So I define in my links controller, I need to define that method. And this is just a function. This is how you define a function in Ruby. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have this method just render JSON link.all. And we saw what that link.all did, right? It just returned all of the links. And this render JSON is going to say, hey, render this as JavaScript object notation. So now when I refresh my page, boom, there are all of those links. So we have these two main things. We have this models and this controllers. Our model interacts with our database. It's the way we can kind of abstract the things in the real world, create models with them, create database tables with them, and have this link model now be able to create stuff to our database, get stuff to our database, and give it back. Our controller, we can think of our controller as like a server at a restaurant, where they're going to handle a request that's coming from, a browser or an iPhone or from whatever. And they're going to go, because I'm in my controller, they're going to go ask the model, hey, give me all of your links. And they're going to return it back to the client. And we can think about this routes file as a way to define our menu. So let's do some more. Let's say we want to do let's say I want to get one link. How do we do one link? Well, I'm going to say, hey, go to the link show method. Go to the links controller and go to the show method. Why the show method? Why is it called show? Once again, it's convention. So I'm going to call this show. Now, what is this colon? Let's just say, what is this? So I'm doing a GET request to what is this? But there's a colon in front of it. Let's do a puts. Params. Let's see what's params. Params is going to be defined by our Rails controller. So I'm going to go API links, and then I'll just do one. Let's refresh. Let's see if we hit that link. So we have this params. Notice in my params, this looks like a lot like an object, right? It's what's called a hash in Ruby. It's very similar. But I see this, what is this? And the value is 1. So I could do this, params. How do you access something in the hash? I can do it like this. What is this? Let's go ahead. I'm going to refresh. There's my 1. Now, I don't want to call what is this? What is that? Well, it's actually an ID. So I'm just going to call this ID so it like makes sense. And right, if I want to see one link, probably makes sense I pass them something unique to find that one thing. So in my controller, what I can do is I can say, something like this, link equals link, and I can call this find method. I need to give this an ID. So I'll use this params ID. And then I'll render JSON, just this one link. So now when I go to APIs links and then pass it an ID, it's going to go to my show page. And that returns one object, one thing. If I go to links, links is returning an array of objects. If I give it an actual ID, it returns that. If I give it something of an ID that does not exist, I get an error.
How many IDs do you have right now?
Let's look. What are my IDs? So here's my links. So I have three things. I have ID1, ID2, ID3. So those are the three things in my database.
So if you do ID2, it's only going to load the second ID you have right there.
So if I do 2, that's giving me back my second thing. Cool. Let's do create. For this, I'm going to step into the console just so I can show this, because there's 2 steps here. Well, there's a couple steps, but I want to kind of go over the difference between something being in memory and something being in storage. So I could say something like this: a link equals link.new. Let's give it a username, Bob. Notice how I have this link variable. It's living in memory. But look at what it is. Do you think this is in the database? And how might you be able to tell if it's in the database? I'm highlighting it.
It has an ID.
Yeah, this does not have an ID. So I can use the .new to create a link to store it in memory, but this is not in the database because it's not saved. So what I can do is I can do a link dot save. That's coming back as true. So link.save returns true, but it also stores this to my database. So now if I type link, now it does have an ID. Okay, so because how we save something, so we're going to do the create method. And I'm also going to throw the pass here. So this is a get API links. This is a get API links and then the ID. What kind of method do you think we're going to use for create if we're looking at this? It's a post request. 2 links. So notice how it's the same thing, get, the URL is the same, but the HTTP verb is different. So I'm going to say, hey, this goes to the links create method. Here's the problem, like now if I try to go to my server, (3001), and I'm doing this request to API links, this is always just going to get back the index, because by default your browser is just when you throw in a URL, it just automatically does a GET request. So when you go to google.com, you're doing a HTTP GET request to that URL, and Google has a menu to like give you back that like search page. If you do a GET request to google.com, it will return like that index.html GET request of the search page. So I want to do a post request. I actually need to use a different tool. I'm going to call, because I want to do a post request. So I'm going to, and you don't have this installed, we'll install this later. But I can now go to this Postman, which is nice because now I can do different requests. And I want to do a post request to this URL. And let's just show you this. Let's just for this render JSON here. Unexpected H. What? Post request, render JSON. Oh no, let's just render JSON link.all. That was working. Okay, so I can go to my create method. I do a post request to API links, and inside of there, I just say, grab back all of those links. Why wasn't that one thing working? Yo. Cool. I guess it wants me to return an object. So and here, if someone gives me a post request to this URL, it returns that. If I do a get request, that grabs me all my articles. So they go to the different methods in my controller. Well, I don't want to, this is where I want to like create something. So I'm going to do a link equals link dot new. Link params. This just kind of follow me with this one. So I'm going to use this private keyword. So just kind of whatever, follow this for now. I don't want to really go into this. So I'm going to create a method called link params. What this is going to do is this is going to use that params dot require. It's kind of going to like sanitize these parameters. So it's going to require that link is there, and it's going to permit, let's just do username for now. So this is just a method, and in Ruby, it's just going to return this. Let's just store this to a variable, let x equal that. Let's x, just so we can like see this, and then return x. Now kind of step back from the code and think, if you're creating something, what do you think you need to give to the database? I mean, how's this kind of different than like getting all of the things? If you're creating something, what do you need to do? Like you're on the browser, you're like the person at the restaurant, you're sitting down, you're ready to order. It's kind of like you would never see this situation in the real world, but like in this analogy, you want to create something to a database, what would you need to do?
You need to tell the database what you want, right?
Yeah, you need to give them the data. Like I need to give them the data. And this is going to come from our form. Like we're going to fill out a form, we're going to hit submit, and that's going to send the data. Now we don't have a form yet, but what I can do with this, and this is why this tool is nice, is I can come in here and I can add, some data. So I do, let me just show this syntax. I do link : username, and let's just go yo, and then also link.title, title here. Cool. And I'm going to send this. I get a 500 error, so that tells me something broke in my server. So let's see what's going on. I can look at my undefined method let. Oh, am I ready? Oh yeah, this is not JavaScript. I'm just, this is Ruby. In Ruby, we don't need to use like let or const. We just declare the variable. So I'm just declaring a var here called X. So I can send that again. Cool. That didn't really return anything, but let's look at this. So here's X. This is what I'm logging. It's username yo, but notice that it's saying unpermitted parameter title. So what this method is doing, this is, it's just like a security thing. Secure thing here, make sure we are only getting what we want. I do want title, so I'm going to allow title. I do want description. And I do want URL. So these are like, I'm going to allow these fields from a form is essentially what I'm saying. Hey, allow the username, allows the title, and allow the description. So this way someone can't come in and be like, something bad or like not in my DB, not in database. So if someone does that, if they do a request, they try to create something and they give me something that's not in my, like not an attribute in my database, I can say, hey, I'm going to filter that out. So only like username can get through. Only username, title, description, and URL can get through. Cool. So now what I can do is I can do an if statement. I can say if link dot save else end. Here's an if else statement in Ruby. So we're writing Ruby right now. It looks a lot like JavaScript, just a little different syntax. Our functions are going to look a little different, but this is just a function called create. Here's an if else statement in Ruby. So what I want to do, if this saves, I want to render JSON link. Else, what I'm going to do is I'm going to render JSON. I'm going to do some like pairs. This is just like Ruby, so just kind of follow along. I'm going to do link dot pairs dot full messages status 422. Let's do this. This is a, just so we can see, this is a post request to API links. And we also need to send in data. We also are going to want to send in, an object with like username, title, description. So now if I run this, I can do API links. I can go ahead and send this. Cool. And this returns the thing that was created to my database, right? And this was created. How do I know that? Well, because we have an ID of 5. So if you ever see an ID, that's like the sure tell way of saying, hey, yeah, this is in my database. All right. So why do we do all of this? Like if else link equals link.new link params. Let's look at like our model really quick, because maybe we don't want to be able to save certain things. So let me give you an example, and I'm just going to copy this. So for this, for like what we're looking at today and the thing we're going to be using, I'm going to add what's called a validation. So I go to my link model, and I'm just going to throw this in here when we can kind of just briefly look at what this is saying. And this is like a Rails method, this validates. And this is a quick, this is actually a shorthand. Rails has or Ruby has a lot of shorthands to like create, like do stuff. This actually just creates an array of strings. So I made this string array of students, and I threw all of our names in here. Oh, I need to throw it. Okay, so I threw all your first names and then the first letter of your last name. And what we're going to say is username needs to include, it needs to be one of these things. Like it needs to be one of these values. So I added this validation in my link model. So before this saves to my database, it's going to check, to see that this is one of the things. So let's go ahead. Now, notice now my username is yo. I'm going to try to save this. Let's create this. And now I get an error. I hit this else statement. Render JSON errors, full messages. I also do this status 422. This actually, when we do an Axios call and we do like our try catch, this will throw an error in your JavaScript if you get a 422. And we actually would need to handle this in the catch section of JavaScript. So that's why I do the 422. It throws an error. Because someone, when we create a link, I'm saying, hey, you have to give me one of your usernames. And it has to be one of those values. So I can now create one because I'm, James and then Y. That's a valid username that creates. But if it's like James, that's not valid. It's not going to save to my database. So there's all types of validations we can do. This is just an example of saying, hey, this needs to be one of these options. Cool. So there's our create method. So let's go to our routes.rb. Let's do a get. Or sorry, an update. So this is going to go to links/ID. And think about it, for my show method, I'm showing one link. So I need the ID of the link. Same thing with an update. If I'm updating a link, don't I need the ID of that link? So that's why I need to throw in the ID. This is going to go to my links update. So if someone orders a put to links and then the ID of the link, I'm saying, hey, go to the links controller to the update method. And we can define this update. So what I want to do in my update, it's going to be very similar to my create, but instead of creating a new link, I want to go find my link in the database because it already exists. And this is almost going to be the same, but I'm going to change one thing. I'm going to call link.update and then also sanitize these parameters. So I find my link. I try to update it. It's going to go through that validation check. And if that successfully updates, then we'll just render back the link. If it doesn't, we'll give back the errors. So this is a put API links and then the ID. So let's first do a get request just to make sure I have one. So let's do 6, I believe. So I did a get request to API 6. There's the username. It's a valid username. So I'm going to do a put request. I'm going to switch that to a put request. And it's still the same link, API links, and then the ID. And notice here, I'm sending the value James. So I'm going to try to update my username from James Y to James. I send it, I get an error. So it does that validation again on update. It's like, hey, this is not a valid name, so I need to switch that back. So you're probably not going to update a username, but maybe I want to update. So if I switch this back to a get, I don't have a URL or I don't have a title or I don't have a description. So let's update that. So let's give this a title. So I could update my database to include some title. Now notice the ID stays the same. I don't update the ID. That's always going to be 6. But now it has a title. And then I could, change that again. I can update this object in my database. Let's do one more. Let's do a def delete. Or sorry, let's throw this in my routes first. So I need to do a delete links :id to links. Actually, this is called destroy. Why destroy? It's convention. The delete, these are the HTTP verbs. These are the methods we go to in our controller. And this is Rails controller, like Rails convention. So in my controller, I do a destroy method. I'm going to do what I did with my update because I need to find the link to destroy. And then I can just do this. I can render JSON link.destroy. And destroy will remove the link from my database. So I can now switch this to a delete. I'm going to send that. That gives me back the thing that was deleted from the database. If I run this again, I get a 404 error because it could not find link with ID 6 because it's been deleted. So let's do a post again to create a link. Notice how the ID is 7. So that you're never going to see an ID of 6 again. If you delete something, that ID is gone. Like the ID just starts at 1, and then every time you create something, it just increments it. So I will never have a link with ID 6 in my database again. Cool. And that is how we do CRUD in our Rails API. Questions on that?
So it's okay that a lot of this is hard to follow, right? Because we're going to be working on this.
Yeah, and like I said, this is kind of why I just wanted you not to code. I wanted you just to follow along. And then when we go through, when we go to React, we'll kind of look at this code. So you can kind of just see it in, what's going on.
So it's pretty similar, just the syntax is a little different, right?
Yeah. And something with, Rails is, like I said, it's harder when you ask me like, oh, how should I do something in React? I'm always like, well, it depends. There's a lot more flexibility, you have a lot more say in how you do stuff. Like it's a kind of a little more loose. It's a lot more loose. With Rails, it's definitely a lot more convention. Like, oh, yes, we called it this destroy and not delete. Why? Because it's convention. And you're going to see, like, I mean, I could just, this is so conventional. Let me show you this. I'm going to comment all of this out. I'm going to do this resources links. So this is all of my paths, right? And I'm just going to add this one line, resources links. And I can just go try all my links. They all still work. See, Rails, if I do resources links, Rails behind the scene will create all of this for us. I can kind of just show you here by showing you the paths I have. This is not, I need to just come up with an invalid. Here are my paths. I have a get, API links. Hey, go to the API links index method. Do a post to API links. Go to the links controller to the create method. Do a get links ID, go to the show. This line of code right here is doing all of that. That one line, line 20. If I get rid of that, those links are now gone. If I comment all these out, they're back. So that's how conventional Rails is. It's like, it's so conventional. If you do things the right way, you can like get away with doing these shorthands. But I like kind of going through this to like actually see these, how like, it's kind of like verbose. Yes, you're going to very much like, this is something, yeah, you'll have just seared into your brain, just memorized. Just do books, CRUDs, Rails, images, actions, or like, not books, that's probably a bad one. Like, here's jobs. Get, post, get, it's get jobs, post jobs. We don't have to worry about this new one or this edit, but get jobs edit, get jobs ID. Notice how these all look the same. That's the model. That would be a job model. Those are the same paths. I could go to like, I don't know, like articles. The only thing that's going to switch is like the name of your model. If it was a cars model, I just switch that to cars. So I find my links, switch them to cars. Cool. There's all my API paths to cars. So very conventional. Cool. Let's go ahead. Let's take a break. I know that was probably a lot to absorb, but
That was quite a bit.
But yeah, let that marinate. Just let that soak in tonight. This definitely takes a while to kind of go in. Sweet. Let's come back. Let's call it 11:30. Give you or let's do 11:25. Give you a little longer.
Yeah, sounds
11:25.